time because you're a child.
It's just kind of the way it goes. Because I'm a child, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Pretty much. See what I can get away with.
Explosion.
Okay. I am Richard Zombeck. I'm here with my co-host, my friend, my colleague.
Friend,
yeah, Steve Lesnikoski.
you got it right.
I did. It took me a couple months to get your name right.
It's a confusing one.
So what did we decide the name of the show was?
Buds with Suds.
Buds with Suds. Suds being SUD, substance use disorder.
Substance use disorder.
So right out of the gate, we admit to being
vile, disgusting drug addicts. At least not for me. I can't speak for you.
I was more of a pathetic drunk.
Yeah.
I'm the alcohol in the crowd. We have to have two, right? We have to have a vile, disgusting drug addict.
Yep.
And we have to have an alcoholic.
That's right.
So I guess what we were talking about today, this being our first episode, was what the hell we're doing here.
I ask myself that every day.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in respect to the show.
No, I ask myself that every day. What the hell are we going to do with this?
Why are we doing this? Well, I had a couple ideas over the last. What have we been trying to get this first thing rolling for like 2 months now?
Easily
yeah,
2 months.
And I probably spent way too much money on equipment and driving you nuts with stuff you have to do in your office and
right.
building soundproof boxes and looking stuff up because I'm a little obsessive when it comes to this kind of stuff.
And that's okay.
I know. Well, I like
it's passion.
Well, I don't know if it keeps me up at night.
I know.
You know, it's one of those things that just I got to get it right.
Absolutely.
And I did a show with a guy in Michigan, and we did a remote show. We did about an hour every day for a year and a half. He was actually a professional radio personality,
yep.
And I didn't really put that much effort into it. I mean, he didn't know anything about the post-production stuff, the editing, the EQ, the compression, how to convert to an MP3, where to host the stuff, all that. He was just a voice. He had a great voice, and he knew a lot about politics and stuff, but he didn't know anything about that. And then, you know, we started doing this thing and talking about doing this, and I was like, well, I actually might run into some people that are going to listen to this, the three of them that are listening to this. And so I think I probably went a little nuts.
Cool.
Well, you're shaking your head, and there's no video, so
I know, but it's like
you got to get a little used to this.
It's cool. I like it. I mean, that's pretty much it, and I think there's no. Oh my God, the recovery related podcasts that I've seen.
They're horrendous.
Yeah, so they're mostly owned by people that either operate in a private rehabilitation facility or they're co-opted by some other advertisement network, and it's a mouthpiece for unscrupulous and bad actors, and so you know that is something that just grosses me out, and it's always irritated me, the market of profiting off of people's pain. So, you know, I think it's worthwhile to have an unco-opted view on things.
Well, and I mean,
I'm sure as hell not making any money off of this. So
yeah,
you know,
we'll put a Patreon page up later and maybe make $50 or something from donations.
No, pay me in pizza.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty decent idea. Well, I mean, I went through this about. I'm trying to think now how long ago it was. It's got to be about 10 or 11 years ago during the financial crisis, right around 2008.
Yes.
And people were losing their homes. There was a mortgage crisis and stuff, and I got involved with that. I went to Congress to lobby for financial reform and got involved with Elizabeth Warren's group and the what was it, AFIL, the Americans for Fairness in Lending. But anyway, a lot of stuff around homeowner advocacy and and mortgage and foreclosure and stuff like that. And that's exactly what happened then too.
Yep.
Is just unscrupulous attorneys coming out. I mean, basically just shitbags, you know. And I think every attorney has a little bit of shitbag in them. I mean, you have to do the job, but also if you're doing work to actually help someone, you're going to live out of your car. So you had people like our current Treasury Secretary, Mnuchin, who was a foreclosure king and just foreclosed on tens of thousands of people for a profit. So I kind of felt that the recovery movement or whatever would probably be going in the same direction. In fact, John Oliver, who used to be on Jon Stewart, he's got a show on HBO now. He did a whole thing on detoxes and rehabs and stuff like that. And then there's this online magazine about recovery called The Fix, Fixx. And it turns out that the guy that runs The Fix also owns a bunch of rehabs and always rates his as 5 stars for user ratings on The Fix. So I kind of get I get your drift, man. I get where you're going with this. Yeah. So topics of conversation could include, for example,
I mean, current state of treatment in this country, what it looks like in Massachusetts. I mean, the peer movement, and really anything that people don't want to talk about can be, abstinence versus harm reduction. Whatever, stuff that needs to be debated because there's a trend in this country right now where there's a groundswell of ideologies that are outside of the norm that are becoming more norm, and that's making a lot of people angry.
Like what, for example?
Medicated assisted treatment becoming a more viable pathway for people, easier access to it. Certainly at the micro level,
And you think there's some resistance to that, or?
I think there's more resistance than people know about. I think there's a lot more private resistance.
Well, in 12-step programs for sure. I mean,
not only 12 steps, but go online and look at what people's opinions are of Narcan and Suboxone, and and I have my own opinions, which I'll definitely share, but. Working in the work that we do, there's a lot of those politics that come into the job, and you have to navigate it. But I don't really think there's been ever a time where it's been discussed, right? So you've essentially had people with degrees upon degrees and doctors and really not knowing what to do. So the natural solution that we've come up with, because it's so bad and we're at critical mass, is start pushing buprenorphine and methadone and
methadone's been around for a long time.
Well, I know that, but
I mean, there's actually what the hell's his name? Russell Brand did a whole special. It's on Netflix. I can put it on as a link under the episode too. About methadone in England, right? Of keeping these people on for persistent time and basically a lifetime.
Yep.
We've actually met and seen a couple people who are lifetime methadone users.
Yeah.
And going back to one of your other points too, I think the whole idea. Well, I mean, your comment about people with degrees and people in the medical field and clinical field and stuff like that, seeing this as a solution. This is the problem that we run into a lot of times. And I think now would be a good time to mention too that you and I are both recovery coaches in Massachusetts and work in the field, something that I never thought I would either do or admit to publicly.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
I have
certified. We're certified.
Certified. Yeah. CARC. Apparently a ham sandwich could get certified.
Yeah.
According to one of our colleagues.
He's not wrong.
I don't think he's wrong either, and I think Massachusetts is looking at doing something about that. I've got a little trepidation around what that's going to look like, particularly hoping that people like us that already have a certification will be grandfathered into it. But I doubt it, because Massachusetts is going to want to make its money on the certification, and
Right.
it's $200 or $300 every couple of years, which is a big nut
Right.
for either of us. But anyway, the whole issue of people who are clinically or medically trained and coming up with ideas of like, well, let's just throw some medication at it, right, with nothing else, and they come up with a solution, and people like us and people that are in recovery don't see this as a viable solution without at least some extra steps in there.
Right.
But the problem we run up against is people with degrees, and you and I have talked about this, that have spent a lot of money on those degrees, don't like to admit that maybe they're wrong.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a certain sense of entitlement that comes with.
Do you think it's entitlement or
Absolutely.
Yeah, well,
It's absolutely entitlement.
I think there's a level of arrogance too.
Yeah.
Of I know better because.
Is that the same thing? When it comes to
possibly, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and add that onto a climate where we're so polarized as a country right now, anyways. It becomes hard to interject what your opinion is without feeling like you are going to either be looked at differently after that, or potential loss of employment at some point, or some other form of retaliation. So
because of your opinion?
Absolutely. When it comes to this, absolutely. I more often than not, I will avoid, even if it's the wrong thing to do in a situation, simply because I don't want to deal with the ramifications.
Yeah, I mean, do you have an example of that, or?
Yeah, dealing with certain doctors in my jobs, certain clinicians, law enforcement. I've gone out of my way to not create the conflict, just simply because I don't want to deal with it. Right? I didn't have the backup to really go up against these large institutions, when essentially I was placed into this new role of, all right, you have some lived experience. We got a lot of people that have similar problems. A lot of people are strung out. We don't know what to do, so let's try something new and plop you down in these places when you're dealing with decades of institutional thinking that is a certain way. It's an impossible job. It really is impossible. I'd probably have more success being director of recovery for Afghanistan than
set up in a tent right near a poppy field.
Right. Than some of the situations I've placed myself in.
Well, but we pulled out of Afghanistan last week, so.
Good. Whatever.
Speaking of which, one of the reasons Tony and I quit was because of the last election, and we didn't want to spend the next 4 years talking about it.
Right.
So, and he incidentally died about 3 months after
really?
we quit. Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
You killed him. you killed him.
I think he lost his will.
You took away the one thing he enjoyed.
He lost his will to live after that. He actually this is actually kind of interesting, and I don't know if this is interesting to anyone else, but he was hooked on opioids when I met him for back pain. He also had his stomach stapled. He was like 400 pounds or something.
Yeah.
He lost a lot of weight. He owned some restaurants. He was a big labor guy in Michigan. And he was on opioids for a really long time.
Yeah.
And after he and I met and we're talking for about 6 months or so on and off air, he decided he wanted to get sober. And he actually home detoxed.
Good for him.
Oh yeah, well, not a great idea, but ended up in the ER and had some physical issues after that. Not as a result of the opioids or detoxing, but ended up in the hospital and treated like garbage and died in the hospital. So
Damn.
Not a great way to go. I actually found out about because I Googled his name because I hadn't heard from him in a couple of days. And
you found the obituary?
I found the obituary online. Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. But that was the last show I did, so hopefully I'm not going to lose you in the same way.
Hey, I've accepted death. So if it happens, cool.
So I think maybe part of the show, responding to some of these questions, another idea I had was there's a lot of online communities.
Absolutely.
And I find some of these questions to be interesting and worthy of discussion. Mm-hmm. I'm not always very impressed with the responses that are coming back. We could certainly answer listener questions if they want to email in, or we could put a phone number up or something like that. And,
I'll put my cell phone number up. I don't care.
We can get a free line, a Google voicemail or something, and we can check that and even play it on air.
Okay.
On the podcast. Another thing I was thinking was interviews with different people doing the same thing that we're doing.
Certainly a lot of those.
And also people not doing the same things we're doing, right? Yeah. And since it's also a podcast about recovery, maybe some people that are in recovery and how they're doing it, what they're doing, their stories. I will say this: anyone that uses the term "my path" or "my journey" will be immediately removed from the show physically, and thrown out of wherever we're recording.
Okay.
And so
what if somebody wants to use a crystal while they're recording instead of an actual microphone?
That could actually screw up the recording.
Okay.
That and any kind of sage or smudging, anything like that could really be a real detriment. Yeah. I was thinking maybe we read our astrology before each episode too, and see what our charts say about what we should be doing.
We'll offend somebody, so whatever.
Because what is it? If it's in, I think if it's Mercury's in retrograde, it screws up electronic stuff, right? That's when all the laptops go down.
I have no clue.
Full moons and Mercury in retrograde and Pluto in some degree of formidable axes to the moon or something. I
mean, I'm grateful for astrology because then we now know who the gullible ones in society are. So, I mean, really.
It's kind of like this last election. They all came out.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's crazy. Like, some of what I've come across for different remedies and what people are trying to do to achieve some sort of sanity in this otherwise insane predicament they've found themselves in, like rapid detoxes and ibogaine, and it's crazy.
What's the ibogaine? Is that the
ibogaine? I was probably 20, maybe a day. I was a day away from going down to Mexico and doing ibogaine. From all the research that I had done, essentially,
is that before or after you got sober?
This was, I would assume, before. I mean, that process in itself was a long one, So,
you could have found some humor in that question.
Yeah, well, I'm very sensitive. But no, ibogaine, it's illegal in the United States, and there's clinics down in Mexico, and it's a psychedelic trip. It comes from I forget the name of the plant, but it's the root of the plant.
Yeah, NPR did 2 or 3 segments.
You can take it in like a tea, or what people do is they boof it. And since we know what boofing is, thanks to all of the national attention on it.
What's boofing?
You didn't hear it in the Kavanaugh proceedings. You're talking about boofing and all that. Yeah, look it up. It's hilarious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you.
So the people listening to this should
anally, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
If you anally insert the ground
that's
up,
like the high school kids are doing with tampons and alcohol now.
The ground up powder, and you go on this long hallucinogenic trip, and it's supposed to strip you down to your core, and when you come out of it, you're withdrawal free, you're addiction free, but
Well, I mean, there's a lot of studies right now. There's an underground movement with psychiatrists and psychologists right now that are basically doing mini trips right? They're not using acid, but they're using other hallucinogens because an acid trip is too long for one session, right?
Right.
It expands for longer than a shrink wants to stick around. But it's basically a guided trip,
Right.
where you go in with headphones and you talk through it and you're monitored, and people have quit smoking, have quit drugs, have quit drinking.
Yep.
Doing this, and,
Yep.
and they've been apparently, at least according to individual reports, whether or not it's anecdotal or not.
So I'm sure there's value in it.
Pretty successful.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we could go back to conversations between Ram Dass and Timothy Leary on acid, though, too, where the argument on Leary's side is that acid is definitely a way into spiritual enlightenment, and Ram Dass's answer to that was that LSD will point you to the moon, but meditation will get you there. Mm-hmm. Right. So there's been a wide range of discussion around. And actually, I think it's Oregon just passed a law legalizing some psychedelics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I actually saw that today. It'll be part of this week's newsletter, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Because I saved that. I found that an interesting article.
So what psychedelics are legalized?
I'm not quite sure. I didn't get that far into the story. I can certainly look it up, and
Well, no, I'm curious if it's like magic mushrooms or under what. Psychedelics is a wide range.
There's a pretty wide range, but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I just saw that it was one of these forget weed. Some Oregonians want to legalize psychedelic mushrooms. So there you go.
Good for them.
So psilocybin and psilocybin is actually exactly what these psychiatrists and psychologists are using for it's not really detox, I guess, but for substance use disorders. Mm-hmm. And actually, I've heard several interviews with people that quit smoking, that quit drinking, that quit doing drugs, that quit all manner of bad habits, I guess, to put them all under one category.
Yep.
Through a psychedelic trip in which they had an awakening or a realization that this wasn't working in their life, right?
Got it.
And actually, you and I have talked about that too, and I've talked about it in my group too, that that's a spiritual awakening is basically that simple, right? Is mm-hmm. that you go, I can't continue to do this anymore.
Right.
Right. So, and then I was thinking maybe some of the might be a little tougher to get them on, but people in the medical field,
sure,
clinicians doing this kind of work, and hopefully there won't be any fist fights on the podcast.
It if there is, oh well, whatever. That's how progress happens, man.
Just kind of go with it.
Yeah.
All right. And
so essentially, we're going to be rambling on about recovery-related topics, and hopefully,
do you think it's going to be rambling?
No, I don't think it's going to be rambling, but I think there's going to be a. I hope there's a strong dialogue that comes from the flow of ideas.
Well, and I think
in an environment that, again, we're highly sensitive people, and the current climate of this country polarizes us even more. So I like it. I like the idea that just sitting down talking.
I think too. One of the benefits is you and I have some similar views, but a little bit of diversity in there, simply because we come from different backgrounds, ages, what we used, mm-hmm. what our drug of choice was. But one of the things that I was thinking was makes this a good forum for topics is I've written articles for a long time. I was a newspaper reporter, and I was published, and people don't read. And writing something takes a long time. Mm-hmm. And formulating an idea on paper so that it comes out kind of coherent or coherently
Right.
is it's a slog.
Yeah.
And I think one of the benefits to doing something like this is, if someone says, well, we kind of want to know what you think about MAT, medically assisted treatment. We can go, well, why don't you go listen to, February's episode where we talk about that, and we have so-and-so on from wherever.
Yeah.
And we talked about that very subject.
Yeah. And
right?
the cool thing is, like, I can talk about practical experience because I've done most of that, all this stuff. Right?
Yeah.
I've done methadone. I've done Suboxone. I've been incarcerated. I've had recovery and incarceration, and I know a little bit about what that looks like. Now, granted, coming from California, the criminal justice system is much more screwed up there than it is here. But
how so?
It's just, there's just more people, right? So when you have more people, you have more need to, lock the undesirables of society up that don't fit that mold, right? So I mean, there's a lot of prisons in California. There's a lot of people being arrested for non-violent drug offenses that are getting into these programs as a result of the prisons being so crowded. And they're on this endless cycle of trying to better themselves to have a chance to expunge their record. And but yeah, essentially, the systems are set up out there to keep you on that probation parole thing for a long time.
Do you think there's any reason for that, or any
I think it's money
incentive?
Absolutely. I mean, the private prison guard union in California is one of the strongest unions there is. Stronger than the firemen, stronger than the policemen.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The political backing that union has, plus all the prisons. Well, not all of them, but the good majority of them are privately run now, so they're owned by corporations. And
that's coming nationally, I think, too.
Yeah. Well, I think they probably have built more, but when I left, I think there was like 42, which, I mean, granted, California is a massive state, but, there's more prisons than universities there. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I remember there being some research too, and some information coming out too, that if the population wasn't at a certain amount, the state was paying the prisons for the money lost. Yeah, which is nice, right? That's a pretty good deal. So if you don't send us enough criminals,
right,
you owe us some money at the end of the year.
Yep.
Which can be in the millions and tens of millions of dollars.
Yep.
Of how that works. So yeah, and well, let me ask you this then. I mean, you and I do share a couple common traits: is cynicism and surliness, probably to a certain degree. And
yeah, I would say so.
I mean, do you think the work that we're doing and many people like us is? I mean, I personally think it's a potentially very effective way to address at least some of this problem.
Yeah.
Right.
But what's the actual like? Are we being effective? Is that your question?
Do you think we're being effective? Or is it too early to tell?
I think it's still too well. I mean, I've had small successes here and there that have shown me that it's effective, but overall, no, we're not being effective. Bigger picture, no, we're not, because it's too new. There isn't enough data. That's that's actually not true. I know there is data.
We're not going to change the world.
No, we're not going to change the world. But I think we're
not saving lives, which is a statement that both you and I
abhor it. Plain and simple. It's disgusting. Anytime I hear somebody say I'm saving a life, I run the other way.
Yeah, I don't
want nothing to do with you.
Not to want to talk to people.
Nothing to do with you because you're an asshole. So, and that's, I've had people look at me sideways when I've said that, but I feel that to be true. So, where the organization where we're at, I think we're doing better than most in this area. As a state, are we ahead of the curve? Yeah. I know that, there's some peer run programs and, other, criminal justice type initiatives in like Pennsylvania and Georgia. But, I don't hear a lot about this type of stuff just because it's not around. I know California has mental health peers, but they're not. It's siloed. We have a healthcare system that's separate. And we're trying to integrate it all together, and it takes a long time. Because I know like out in California, there's mental health peers, and they don't deal with, the substance use side of it. They only deal with the mental health side. But my argument's always been, I think it's one and the same. Substance use, for a good majority of people, myself included, at times was medication for my mental health disorder, which I didn't want to deal with.
Yeah.
So, I could rant on all day about that. But
I think I get the sense sometimes, and this is, I don't want to generalize the statement, but I think this programs like this, and not just here and not just ours. I think you and I, what we're doing and where we are fortunate that we don't have to deal with a lot of the garbage that a lot of other people have to deal with. But I think a lot of these programs were put together out of desperation, really.
Absolutely.
Out of we don't know what else to do.
Because all the white kids are dying.
Right.
All the white kids, Johnny down the street's dying of a fentanyl overdose.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'll say that. No secret behind that.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
So,
when middle class kids start kicking the bucket, it's time to do something.
It takes what it takes, but still, it's all this was thrown together, and it was we're still at critical mass, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to create a living for myself and support myself through my own, contributions and all that jazz. But there's still a lot of things that I don't like that I see, and I've become less. I've attempted to become less focused on that and more focused on like what can I do to better the situation for myself and for the people I have the opportunity to come in contact with, instead of raging against the system that is designed to really not empower people at all. A medical model is not designed to empower people. People will disagree with me, but I don't feel that a model that profits off people's pain and misery is one of empowerment. So again, this is a role that's so new, and I don't really think people know what it is. I mean, for the longest time, I remember the first 2 jobs that I had in this particular peer-based role, most of my job was explaining what I actually did. Yeah. And having to talk to, emergency room nurses and cops and like what I'm actually doing, because I don't look the part. Like, I don't look like a drug addict. I'm not tattooed. No, I don't have any tattoos.
Piercings?
Nope.
Nothing on your body?
Nope. Stupid. I
burn marks, track marks.
I got burn marks. I got track marks.
I mean, you do kind of. You look like a reprobate. So.
Okay.
I noticed that exact same thing when I started working, because we work in hospitals, right? And I'm a middle-aged guy, and I'm walking around with a badge, and people are addressing me as doctor. Yeah, right? They're like, "Hello, doctor. Hello, doctor." I'm like, "Okay, that's enough." Yeah, right? Because I don't look. In fact, I did. I was doing I was doing some these presentations. They're not really presentations, but they're Schwartz rounds, right? And if you look that up online, it's basically people that come in and talk to the medical community about a particular illness or they have Schwartz rounds on diabetes, they have Schwartz rounds on cancer, and it's basically about compassionate care, right? And I was obviously doing it on recovery and addiction and alcoholism and stuff. And the woman who was setting up the Schwartz rounds told me after about my second or third one, she's like, I didn't even know it was you when you walked in the room because I was expecting someone with long hair and tattoos. Right. So, and I love getting into these conversations with people who have been doing this for a while that just don't believe the stigma is real, because the stigma is real.
Absolutely.
And people have negative expectations.
We have it easy.
People have, and people have negative expectations of what we are and who we are and how we think and how we're going to react. And I've gotten into that too, where the assumption is that I'm highly emotional and easily triggered, and another word I can't stand, and fragile, right? Mm-hmm. I'll give you a quick example. As I was talking to a clinician at one point, and I'm coming up end of this month. I'll be 12 years sober. So I was over 11 years sober when I was talking to this guy, and I'd mentioned my father died suddenly a couple of years ago, and his immediate reaction was, "Well, it's amazing you didn't drink." I was like, "Really?"
Of course.
Well, and the thing is you and I had this incident, not that particular one, but we had this incident.
Have had this incident
where people have said, well, what happens when the addict or alcoholic inevitably drinks, right, or inevitably uses again, and it's a question of a bubble, right? It's a question of the people who are working in this clinically are seeing people coming in and out of detox, relapsing, going back out, coming back in, going back out, coming back in. Right. And that's usually the first 6 months to a year. And then after that, they don't hear from them again. Right. And they don't see what you and I see with people with decades of sobriety who have very good lives and are perfectly fine and aren't easily triggered and aren't constantly craving and are just living their lives as sober people, right? And that actually, I think, at a certain point, you said something in a text last night that I found interesting, and I don't want to.
That I have a solution for living?
Yeah. I found that.
Because it's true.
Well, I'll briefly give the background, not in detail.
I don't care.
You were having,
I got into a fight with my significant other.
You were yeah, okay. And
it happens.
And just like any person that knows someone else would say, how's it going? And your response was, I have a solution for living. Yeah. And I feel that way a lot of times myself too. Is that I watch people, the quote unquote normal people in society, right? The people that aren't us, as it were. A friend of mine calls them the muggles.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I thought so.
I like that.
And everyone's kind of effed up a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? But most of the people out there don't know why. Right?
If they don't know why, or maybe they do know why and they don't let it affect them to the point of jamming illegal narcotics into their veins.
Right, or drinking themselves to death. Yeah. So that goes back to the super sensitive comment earlier in this conversation. But yeah, I found that I found that particularly poignant and probably worthy of a larger conversation on another episode, because I think people, depending on how you do it and what your sobriety means to you and what recovery means to you, it can be eye-opening, I think. And I found that and I'll say that in retrospect that it was difficult at times, because going through it, I don't think I realized how tortured I was when I was going through certain episodes. No. And in retrospect, I did, and I managed to stay sober. And the stuff that I've learned in sobriety and in recovery through conversations with other people who think like I do and who, like you said, have solutions to this, which are basically just solutions to life, right? A lot of the stuff that you and I talk about and that you and I have done and that we apply to our lives are philosophies that have been around, certainly not for the 75 years of 12-step programs, but have been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years in Stoic philosophy and Buddhism and all kinds of different manners of thought and emotion. And
some crusty kid at the White Whale sure as hell didn't make this up. You know what I mean? Like, and that is what that solution is based off of. It's based off of connection, and it's not a connection with, the unknown, or, well, part of it is, but the other part of it is connections with people, since like opiate use in particular is pretty isolating. And like I went through, I'll just share this for some framework. I went through years of trying to will my way to something different, and it just didn't work. And the moment that I started to let go of some of my ideas and belief systems that I had about who I should be and who I am, the foundation was there to change. And, my life today is completely different than what I thought it was going to be, almost 4 years ago. So, at about 6 months of recovery this time, since, I've been doing this for off and on since I was 19, so a little over 14 years, I was in a dark place. I was in a deep depression, and I seriously contemplated suicide for the first time. Like I got to the point where I had a plan, and I went to a meeting. It was a Monday night meeting, and I talked about that in a way that I hadn't talked about before, simply because I was surrounded by people that I trusted. And I knew probably would judge me, but would understand somewhat. So I didn't really care. And, a guy pulled me aside after the meeting. We started talking, and he essentially said, I went through the same thing, and this is what I did. And this is what I continue to go through when these things happen again, because it pops up again from time to time. So, I don't know of another place that I can go. I'm sure they exist, but I just don't know of them, that I can be honest with a bunch of people that I really don't like most of them, but I can relate to a lot of what's going on. So therefore I have a connection with them that I just don't have with other people. So, it's connection for me, man. And, I think this role in particular puts us in a place where you can connect with other people where maybe they've never had that opportunity to connect, because a clinician-client relationship doesn't allow for what we can do. So, in that sense, I'm hopeful when it comes down to it, moving forward. But yeah, we still have a long way to go.
Well, and I to what you were saying previously, it was the same kind of thing for me. Is I found groups that the ones that I was most comfortable in were the ones where you could walk in and someone would go, "How's it going?" And you go, I kind of feel like hanging myself today. And they'd go, "Yeah, have a seat, have a cup of coffee, and we'll see how you feel after the meeting."
Right.
It was, and it's not, I know, I can think of a few people that would listen to this and go, because it's like, oh, well, that's suicidal ideations and something needs to be done about that. And it's like, well, no, sometimes it's conversation. And
right.
I mean, in your case, it was definitely a little more serious than what I was going through. I never really had thoughts of it. I had thoughts of, I wouldn't be disappointed if I didn't wake up.
Right.
I wouldn't be disappointed if a truck hit me on 495. I wouldn't be disappointed if a bus ran me over on when I was crossing the street.
Yep.
But one of the things that I do find is that that conversation, that that Me Too, right? And I don't mean hashtag Me Too. I mean that Me Too, and I've been there too, and I know how that feels.
Yep.
That conversation, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I also find that one of the issues that needs to be addressed, and I think it is to a degree, but I'm not really sure that it's being addressed correctly. And I don't mean by individual organizations, I mean by the community as a whole, is that when you're in recovery yourself and you're doing this work, I find for myself that I'm more acutely aware of my, for lack of a better terms, and not to use 12-step terms, but I think I'm more acutely aware of my own recovery, my own shortcomings, my own defects, my own what I'm doing wrong. Because if I'm suggesting that someone do something, I've got to be able to do it myself, right? And so I think for I get concerned sometimes that being thrown to the wolves like that with really no built-in supports. And then again, we can talk about how everyone's responsible for their own recovery, right? But I've had conversations with people that are fairly well placed in this system that have alluded to that could be a real issue, right? And you and I have had conversations about, for example,
we've already seen people die,
right, doing this job.
Yeah,
right. Now, is it as a result of this job, or is it because of this job, or that again?
I'm sure it's plays some part,
right? And I think that the supports and the pressure and the stuff like that. But by the same token, too, you don't want to be in a position where you're treated like you're fragile and easily triggered, and everyone's walking around on eggshells because the sober guy's here, and he could be in a bell tower at any moment with a sniper rifle, and and not being able to talk to us like we're human beings. So I think there's a very thin line to walk there as far as and I think it's going to be up to the individual organizations to know how they're going to play this, and the individual. There are associations being created, not as quickly as most of us would like, but for recovery coaches to give us a voice. And, so apparently there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about. There are future podcasts. I think our next 2 episodes are going to be either Steve interviewing me or me interviewing Steve about our recovery, about our journey. There's that word.
Journey, that's for sure.
How we got into this field, and what our thoughts are on around certain topics.
Look forward to it.
So again, this is Richard Zombeck with my colleague Steve Lesnikowski, and we are Buds with Suds.